Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be kind of exploring these excerpts from John Knowles, a separate piece. It's this really fascinating story about friendship and perception and how war impacts even those who think they're not really touched by it.
Right.
And we're going to be focusing specifically on the relationship between Finney and our narrator, these two boys at this elite boarding school during World War II.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, the way their dynamic unfolds is so captivating, especially when you consider Finney's kind of unique way of dealing with the war, or I guess not dealing with it at all.
Yeah. I think what's so fascinating about it is that Knowles uses Finney's denial not just as a plot device,
Right.
but as a window into this very human desire, this like yearning for simplicity and control
Yeah.
when you're faced with just overwhelming chaos.
Oh, absolutely.
You could almost understand why someone, especially, a young man like Finney, whose world has been totally upended,
Yeah.
would choose to believe that the war is just a fabrication rather than accept this like harsh reality that it presents.
Yeah. It really makes you think, doesn't it, about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the world, especially when things feel really out of control.
Oh, yeah.
And Finney's return to Devon after his injury, I think, is a great example of this. He comes back insisting the war is just a hoax made up by fat old men to keep young people down. It's almost comical in a way,
Mm-hmm.
but underneath that humor, there's this real sense of desperation.
Absolutely. Knowles really masterfully layers those seemingly outlandish claims
Yeah.
with this subtle undercurrent of pain and fear.
Right.
Finney's Olympic dreams are totally shattered. The world is at war, and his denial becomes like a shield,
Mm.
a way to protect himself from this reality that feels like just too much to bear.
Too much.
And he even twists things like gas rationing into part of the conspiracy,
Oh, totally.
claiming it's just a way for these fat old men to keep all the good food for themselves.
Yeah, he even goes as far to picture them like enjoying these huge steaks while everyone else is making sacrifices. It's like he's creating this alternate reality where the rules don't apply to him. And for a while, it seems to work. Like he convinces our narrator to help him train for the 1944 Olympics.
Right.
Even though the games are obviously going to be canceled.
Yeah.
It's like he's willing himself and the narrator to believe in this impossible future.
And that's where I think the real tension of the story lies.
Hmm.
In the narrator's struggle to reconcile Finney's fabricated reality with the truth.
Right.
He knows the war is real, yet he finds himself like drawn into Finney's world. We have to ask ourselves why.
Yeah, why is it simply the power of Finney's charisma, or is there something deeper at play?
Yeah,
A longing for that same sense of peace and control that Finney seems to embody.
exactly.
It's got to be a bit of both. I think, the excerpts really highlight how magnetic Finney's personality is. There's this scene where they're running early in the morning,
Yeah.
and the narrator describes the cold air and the stillness of the landscape, and then the sudden burst of energy he feels, all thanks to Finney's coaching.
Hmm.
Finney pushes him beyond what he thought he was capable of.
Right.
And for a moment, the war does feel distant, irrelevant even.
Yeah, it's almost as if Finney's belief in the narrator becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Totally.
He sees potential where the narrator sees limitations.
Right.
And that's a powerful thing to have someone believe in you so completely. Yeah. Even if it means believing in a lie.
Even if it means believing in a lie. Yeah. But Knowles doesn't let us forget about the war. He uses this recurring motif of a wave to kind of represent it slowly building in the background. And you get this sense that no matter how hard Finney tries to ignore it, this wave is coming and it's going to crash over their little world at Devon eventually.
That imagery is so powerful, isn't it? It speaks to the inevitability of the war's impact, the way it's going to disrupt their lives, no matter how much they try to deny it.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder, is Finney's denial ultimately a form of strength or a dangerous delusion?
Right. Is he bravely holding back the tide or just delaying the inevitable? It's a question we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into their relationship. But even in these early excerpts, we see how Finney's unique perspective forces us to confront our own perceptions of truth and reality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Finney's denial isn't just about avoiding the war.
Yeah.
It's about shaping the world into something that he can control, something that makes sense to him.
Right.
He's constantly challenging conventions, questioning authority,
Yeah.
offering alternative explanations for events. And that in itself is a powerful act even if it's rooted in delusion.
Totally. And it's this clash between Finney's manufactured reality and the encroaching reality of war that creates, I think, the central conflict of the story. We see hints of it in these excerpts, these moments where Finney's composure cracks, and we glimpse the vulnerability beneath his carefully constructed facade.
He can't maintain that illusion forever. The war is there, casting a long shadow over their lives.
Yeah.
And the question becomes, what happens when the illusion shatters?
Right. What has?
How will both Finney and our narrator cope when the wave finally breaks? We'll delve into those questions as we continue our deep dive into A Separate Piece.
As we kind of get deeper into these excerpts from A Separate Piece, it becomes so clear that Finney's denial, while it's alluring, is ultimately this fragile construction. The war, despite his attempts to erase it, just keeps creeping back in. And there's a scene in the locker room that really struck me. It's like we're seeing these cracks in Finney's facade start to widen.
Yeah, it's a very subtle shift, but it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
The familiar sights and smells of the gym are still there, but the atmosphere just feels different,
Right.
heavier somehow.
Easier, yeah.
And Finney's making these kind of offhand remarks about the missing maids.
Right.
These little jabs that reveal a growing frustration with the limitations that are imposed by his injury. It's almost as if the reality of his situation is starting to seep through, despite his best efforts to keep it at bay.
Yeah, and when the narrator points out how things have changed, Finney doesn't even try to argue, Instead, he says, "You're going to be the big star now." It's like he's acknowledging, maybe for the first time, that he can't fulfill his own athletic dreams.
There's a deep sadness in that statement, a resignation that we haven't seen from Finney before.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's known for his optimism, his ability to turn any situation into a game, but here
Right.
we see the weight of reality pressing down on him, forcing him to confront the limitations of his carefully constructed world.
And then there's that line that really stood out to me. What in hell did you do that for? When Finney finds out the narrator quit being assistant crew manager.
Right?
It's not just annoyance.
Yeah.
There's an edge to his voice, almost an accusation. It's like he needs the narrator to buy into his version of reality in order to sustain it himself.
Exactly. Finney's clinging to this idea of the narrator becoming the big star, almost as a surrogate for his own lost dreams.
Right.
And the narrator's decision to quit crew feels like a betrayal,
Yeah.
a rejection of the world that Finney is so desperately trying to create.
It makes their relationship feel almost parasitic, wouldn't you say? Like Finney drawing energy and validation from the narrator while the narrator struggles to maintain his own sense of identity in the shadow of Finney's larger-than-life personality.
That's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
I think their friendship has definitely taken on this element of necessity.
Yeah.
Finney needs the narrator's belief to fuel his own denial, while the narrator is drawn to the escape that Finney offers from the harsh realities of war and the pressures of school.
Right.
It's a complex, almost symbiotic relationship. It's bound to have consequences for both of them.
Yeah, it's interesting because while we see these cracks in Finney's facade, his power to shape reality, at least for the narrator, is still very much intact.
Yeah.
There's a scene where Finney directly confronts a teacher, Mr. Ludsbury, who's talking about the importance of war preparation, and Finney completely disregards the adult world's grim acceptance in the war.
Right.
It's a clash between his almost childlike idealism and the harsh realities that everyone else seems to have just accepted.
And Knowles uses this confrontation to really highlight the allure of Finney's perspective.
Yeah.
He's not just denying the war. He's actively rebelling against it, refusing to let it dictate his life. And in that moment, his defiance, his refusal to conform, almost makes you wish you could believe him,
Right.
even though you know better.
It's like he's saying, why should we have to accept this? Why should we let this war, this thing happening somewhere else, intrude on our lives and our dreams?
And for the narrator caught between Finney's world and the reality of the war, that question is incredibly seductive.
Yeah.
He wants to believe Finney to hold on to that sense of innocence and possibility, but the war is a constant presence, like a shadow lurking just beyond the edges of their awareness.
Yeah, and that sense of foreboding, I think, is amplified by Knowles' masterful use of language, he writes. So the war swept over like a wave at the seashore, gathering power and size as it bore on us, overwhelming in its rush, seemingly inescapable, and then at the last moment, eluded by a word from Phineas. It's such a vivid image. And it perfectly captures the tension building in the story.
That wave metaphor is so powerful, isn't it? It speaks to the inevitability of the war's impact, the way it's slowly but surely encroaching on their lives. Finney, with his words and his charisma, manages to hold back the tide for a while. But we know it's only a matter of time before that wave breaks.
Right.
And when it does, the consequences are going to be profound.
It makes you wonder if the narrator's decision to go along with Finney's denial is ultimately an act of self-preservation.
Hmm.
Is he choosing to believe in Finney's world because it's the only way he can cope with the looming threat of the war?
That's a really intriguing question.
Mm.
It raises the idea that sometimes believing in a lie, even for a little while, can be a way to protect ourselves from a really painful truth. But the problem with denial is that it can't last forever.
Right.
Reality always has a way of catching up with us.
And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore how that reality ultimately intrudes on Finney and the narrator's world, shattering their illusion of peace and forcing them to confront the consequences of their choices.
It's a powerful and poignant conclusion that speaks to the enduring themes of lost innocence and the struggle to find truth and meaning in a world that's often chaotic and unpredictable.
So we've been talking about Finney's denial and how he manages to build this world where the war doesn't exist, at least for a while, but you can only kind of outrun reality for so long, right?
Yeah.
As we get to the end of these excerpts, it feels like the tension has just reached this breaking point.
Yeah, that's the brilliance of Noel's writing. He
Yeah.
creates this idyllic world at Devon, full of youthful energy and camaraderie, but
Right.
there's always this undercurrent of unease, this sense that the bubble's about to burst.
Yeah.
And the closer we get to the end, the more palpable that feeling becomes.
It makes you think about the choices we make when we're faced with difficult truths.
Yeah.
Do we cling to comforting illusions even when we know they're not real? Or do we face reality head on, even if it's painful?
Those are questions that resonate with all of us, don't you think?
Yeah.
Especially in times of uncertainty or crisis. It's so tempting to seek refuge in simple explanations,
Right.
in narratives that offer a sense of control or meaning. But the danger, as we see with Finney, is that those narratives can become so ingrained that we lose sight of the truth altogether.
And what about the narrator? He's clearly aware of the war, yet he allows himself to be drawn into Finney's world. Is it just loyalty, or is there something more complex at play?
I think it goes beyond just loyalty. Remember that scene where they're running in the early morning and the narrator describes feeling magnificent, almost superhuman?
Right.
That feeling is directly tied to Finney's belief in him.
Yeah.
It's like Finney unlocks a potential that the narrator never knew he had.
It's almost as if Finney's vision becomes the narrator's reality, and that's incredibly powerful to have someone believe in you so completely,
Yeah.
even if it means believing in a lie.
Exactly. And for a young man like the narrator who's still trying to figure out who he is and what he's capable of,
Right.
that kind of validation can be intoxicating. It's no wonder he's drawn to Finney's world, even though a part of him knows it's not real.
But as the excerpts progress, we see that the narrator's complicity and Finney's denial comes at a cost.
Yeah.
There's a growing resentment, this sense that he's sacrificing his own identity to maintain Finney's illusion.
And that resentment kind of culminates in that explosive moment in the gym when Finney lashes out,
Right.
accusing the narrator of abandoning him. It's a raw, vulnerable moment that reveals the depth of Finney's dependence on the narrator.
It really makes you question the nature of their friendship,
Yeah.
Is it truly a bond built on mutual respect and support? Or is it something more akin to codependency, with each boy needing the other to fulfill a certain role?
That's a question Knowles leads us to ponder, and it's one that resonates far beyond the confines of Devon School.
Yeah.
It speaks to the complexities of all human relationships,
Yeah.
the ways in which we rely on each other, support each other,
Yeah.
but also sometimes use each other to meet our own needs, even at the expense of the other person.
And in the end, isn't that what makes A Separate Piece such a timeless and compelling story?
Yeah.
It's not just a coming-of-age tale set against the backdrop of war. It's a profound exploration of friendship loyalty and the human struggle to reconcile our desires with the often harsh realities of the world.
And what's so remarkable is that Knowles doesn't offer any easy answers.
Right.
He leaves us to grapple with these questions, to examine our own relationships, our own choices, and to confront the ways in which we might be clinging to illusions even when they're no longer serving us.
It's a powerful message, and one that stays with you long after you finish the book as we wrap up this deep dive. I encourage you to think about the questions we've raised today. What does it mean to truly be a friend? How do we balance our need for escape with the demands of reality? And what happens when the stories we tell ourselves, the narratives that give our lives meaning, start to unravel?
These are questions that each of us must answer for ourselves. But by exploring them through the lens of A Separate Piece, we gain a deeper understanding of the human condition with all its complexities and contradictions.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into A Separate Piece. It's a story that even decades later continues to challenge and inspire us, forcing us to confront the enduring questions of friendship, loyalty, and the search for truth in a world often shrouded in illusion.